Jimmy Fallon was praising Sarah Snook for her commanding performance as Shiv Roy, when something in her expression suddenly shifted. The acclaimed actress, who had been confidently discussing her Emmy-winning role moments before, began trembling slightly in her chair. "Jimmy," she said softly, her voice shaking, "playing the most powerful woman on television is ironic, because I'm the weakest person I know." The Tonight Show studio, which had been celebrating her incredible portrayal of a media mogul, fell into confused silence. Sarah's confession hung in the air like a contradiction that nobody could process. Jimmy's admiring smile faded as he realized this wasn't modesty about her acting. This was something much deeper and more troubling. It was November 15th, and Sarah had come on the show to discuss Succession's final season and her Emmy win for Outstanding Supporting Actress. The interview had been going brilliantly, full of behind-the-scenes stories and praise for her complex character work. But when Jimmy mentioned how Shiv's confidence seemed so natural to her, something inside Sarah cracked. "I have severe panic disorder," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Every single scene as Shiv required medication, just so I could breathe." The words escaped like secrets that had been suffocating her for years. The studio fell into complete shock. Jimmy's face showed pure confusion and growing concern. The audience seemed frozen, trying to reconcile the powerful character they loved with the vulnerable woman sitting before them. "What do you mean, medication?" Jimmy asked gently, his voice full of compassion and worry. "Sarah, you seem so confident, so in control." His tone had shifted completely from celebratory host to deeply concerned friend. "Beta blockers before every take," Sarah explained, her hands visibly shaking as she spoke. "Sometimes Xanax if the panic was really bad." Her voice carried the shame of someone who felt weak for needing chemical help to do her job. "The irony wasn't lost on me," she continued, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm playing this incredibly powerful woman while falling apart inside." The contrast between character and actor was stark and heartbreaking. Jimmy leaned forward in his chair, his entire focus on the woman who was clearly struggling even now. "When did the panic attack start?" he asked carefully, understanding this was incredibly difficult territory. "About 5 years ago, right when I started getting bigger roles," Sarah replied, the timing cruelly ironic. "Success should have made me feel more confident." Her laugh was bitter and sad. Instead, it made everything worse. "The more people expected from me, the more terrified I became," she continued, describing a cycle that many successful people experience. "Every audition, every role, every interview became a potential disaster in my mind." The pressure she described was suffocating just to hear about. The audience was completely silent now, understanding they were witnessing something unprecedented. This wasn't an actress giving an interview anymore. This was someone sharing a deeply personal struggle with millions of viewers. The cameras captured every emotion crossing her face. "What do the panic attacks feel like?" Jimmy asked softly, wanting to help people understand what she was experiencing. Sarah took a shaky breath before answering. "Like drowning in air," she said, her description vivid and terrifying. "Your heart pounds so hard you think it'll explode." She touched her chest unconsciously. "You can't catch your breath, you're sweating, and you're convinced you're about to die. But the worst part," she continued, her voice growing smaller, "is the feeling that everyone can see how weak and pathetic you really are." The internal narrative she described was devastating in its cruelty toward herself. Behind the scenes, producers were grappling with how to handle this unprecedented confession. Sarah was clearly having anxiety symptoms during the interview itself, but cutting away might make things worse. They decided to let her continue, ready to intervene if necessary. "How did you manage to play Shiv?" Jimmy asked, genuinely curious about her process. "She's so commanding, so fearless." Sarah's smile was heartbreaking. "Method acting in reverse," she said with dark humor. "I had to become the person I wish I could be." Her explanation revealed the psychological complexity of her performance. "Before every scene where Shiv had to be powerful, I'd take beta blockers and tell myself I was borrowing her confidence," she continued. For those few hours, I could pretend to be someone who wasn't afraid of everything. The temporary escape her character provided was both helpful and tragic. Did anyone on set know? Jimmy asked, understanding that hiding mental health struggles in high-pressure environments is incredibly isolating. Sarah shook her head sadly. I got really good at hiding it, she admitted. Panic attacks between takes, medication in my trailer. Her ability to compartmentalize was impressive and concerning. Everyone thought I was just being professional. But the Succession cast is like family, Jimmy pointed out, knowing the show's reputation for close relationships. You could have told them. Sarah's expression grew even more pained. That's what made it worse, she said, her voice barely audible. They're all so strong, so talented. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I felt like a fraud being among them. Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment. He stood up from behind his desk and walked over to sit in the chair next to Sarah, abandoning the traditional interview setup. Sarah, you're one of the most talented actors of your generation, he said gently. Mental illness doesn't change that. But what if people see me differently now? Sarah asked, voicing the fear that had kept her silent for years. What if directors think I'm unreliable? Her career anxiety was compounding her general anxiety in a vicious cycle. What if they see you as human? Jimmy countered softly. What if they respect your courage? His reframing was gentle but powerful. As if summoned by the conversation about panic attacks, Sarah began showing signs of one happening in real time. Her breathing became shallow, her hands trembled more violently, and perspiration became visible on her forehead. Sarah, are you okay right now? Jimmy asked, recognizing the symptoms she'd described. Are you having one now? Sarah nodded, unable to speak, as her breathing became more labored. Okay, we're going to breathe together, Jimmy said calmly, drawing on techniques he'd learned from previous guests who'd discussed anxiety. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. He began demonstrating the breathing pattern. The studio watched in real time as Jimmy helped Sarah through a panic attack on live television. The audience was completely silent, understanding they were witnessing something profound and vulnerable. This wasn't entertainment anymore, it was human connection. That's it, just focus on the breathing, Jimmy continued, his voice steady and reassuring. You're safe here, nothing bad is happening. His calm presence seemed to anchor Sarah as she fought through the physical symptoms. After several minutes of guided breathing, Sarah's color began to return, and her trembling subsided. Better? Jimmy asked gently. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered, mortified at having a panic attack on national television. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. Her shame was palpable and heartbreaking. Don't apologize, Jimmy said firmly. You just showed millions of people what courage really looks like. His validation seemed to surprise her. That wasn't weakness. That was strength. You know what's amazing? Jimmy continued, looking directly at her. You just did what Shiv could never do. Sarah looked confused. You showed vulnerability. You asked for help. You were authentically human. The audience began to applaud, but it wasn't typical entertainment applause. This was recognition, support, and love for someone who had just shared incredible vulnerability. Many people were openly crying, moved by what they'd witnessed. How are you feeling now? Jimmy asked, checking on her well-being. Sarah took a moment to assess herself before answering. Embarrassed, she said honestly, but also lighter somehow. Her surprise at feeling relief was evident. Like I don't have to pretend anymore. What would you say to other people who struggle with anxiety? Jimmy asked, recognizing that Sarah's experience could help millions of viewers. Sarah looked directly into the camera. That you're not alone, she said, her voice stronger now. And that having anxiety doesn't make you weak. Her message was simple but powerful. Some of the strongest people I know have anxiety. I used to think that if people knew about my panic attacks, they'd see me as fragile, she continued. But maybe being fragile and doing it anyway is actually brave. Her Her reframing of vulnerability as courage was inspiring. The thing about playing Shiv, Sarah said, connecting her character to her personal journey, is that she taught me that power isn't about never being afraid. She paused thoughtfully. It's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. They talked for a few more minutes about anxiety management, about the pressure on actors to appear perfect, and about the importance of mental health support in high-stress careers. Sarah was more genuine and relatable than she'd ever been in public. When the interview ended, something remarkable happened. Instead of rushing off to her next commitment, Sarah stayed on stage, talking with audience members who approached her with their own stories of anxiety and panic disorders. The studio became an impromptu support group. "I never expected this response," Sarah told Jimmy as they watched people sharing their experiences around them. "I thought everyone would judge me for being weak." Jimmy shook his head. "They see someone who's human, someone who's brave enough to be real." The episode aired exactly as it happened, including Sarah's panic attack and Jimmy's response. The network had initially considered editing out the most vulnerable moments, but Sarah requested they keep everything. "If it helps one person feel less alone, it's worth it," she said. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Mental health organizations praised Sarah's courage in showing what panic attacks actually look like. Anxiety support groups reported increased membership. The hashtag Panic and Power began trending, with people sharing their own stories of succeeding despite anxiety. Other actors began opening up about their mental health struggles. Ryan Reynolds discussed his anxiety. Emma Watson talked about therapy. The entertainment industry's culture of perfection began showing cracks, allowing for more honest conversations about mental health. 3 months later, Sarah returned to The Tonight Show. She looked different, more relaxed, more comfortable in her own skin. "How are you doing?" was Jimmy's first question, asked with genuine care and investment in her well-being. "I'm still anxious," Sarah replied honestly, her smile genuine and peaceful. "But I'm anxious openly now." Her acceptance of her condition was healthier and more sustainable. It turns out that hiding anxiety makes it worse. Sarah had used the months since her revelation to become an advocate for mental health awareness in the entertainment industry. She'd partnered with organizations to provide anxiety resources for actors and had begun speaking openly about her experiences. "Any regrets about having a panic attack on live television?" Jimmy asked, still somewhat amazed at what had happened. Sarah shook her head without hesitation. "Best panic attack I ever had," she said with humor that felt genuine rather than defensive. "It finally freed me from pretending to be someone I'm not." Her perspective on the experience had completely shifted. "I realized that night that the gap between who I am and who I pretend to be was killing me," she continued. "Closing that gap has been the most important work of my life." Her personal growth was evident and inspiring. The Tonight Show established partnerships with anxiety organizations directly because of Sarah's appearance. They featured regular segments on mental health, panic disorder education, and resources for people in high-pressure careers. Jimmy learned something profound that November night that changed how he supported guests who showed vulnerability. "I realized that sometimes the most important thing I can do is just breathe with someone," he reflected later. "Presence can be more powerful than any question." Sarah Snook's panic attack revelation became more than a viral moment. It became a cultural shift in how the entertainment industry discusses mental health, particularly anxiety disorders that often hide behind successful careers. The ripple effects continued for years. Mental health became a more acceptable topic in industry conversations. Studios began providing better mental health resources for cast and crew. Countless individuals found the courage to seek help after seeing someone they admired struggle with similar issues. Years later, Sarah would say that having a panic attack on live television was one of the most important moments of her career. "That night, I stopped trying to be the powerful woman I thought people wanted me to be," she reflected. "I started being the beautifully anxious woman I actually am, and that turned out to be much more powerful." The lesson of that extraordinary November night was profound. Sometimes our greatest strength comes from admitting our deepest fears And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply breathe through the panic together. In a world that demands perfection from public figures, Sarah Snook reminded everyone watching that real power comes not from never being afraid, but from being afraid and showing up anyway. Her panic attack became a gift to millions of anxiety sufferers, proof that you can be successful and struggle with mental health at the same time.